All right, everybody, Mr. Brudengraber here. So this one's going to be a little bit longer. This isn't just about what you need to be accomplishing during distance learning. I figured we need to have a chat. And part of me thought, no, Brudengraber, you just need to shut up. This will have nothing to do with you. Um, I thought to myself, well, I'm not really a leader. I'm not an influencer on social media or whatever heck that is. Um, and as you can tell, I'm not black. And I thought, well, then I just need to let other people put their message out and be the leaders and say what they want to say. But then I remembered who I am, and among other things, I'm a teacher. And if we were in class today and yesterday and last week and tomorrow, we would certainly be talking about this, right? That's what I do. We come in after a weekend and we have a conversation about what's going on in the world. We talk about what's happening socially. We talk about what's happening economically. We talk about what's happening politically, because I see part of my job as helping you all decipher what's going on in the world, especially for my teenage students. It is part of my job to help you understand what's happening. And since mostly my students and former students will be the ones viewing this, it seemed appropriate then. So here it goes. And I want to start with this. Part of the reason I'm so upset, and many people are upset, is because I legitimately love this country. I intentionally put my USA jersey on. I got my Dodger hat on today, right? Not only my team, but also the team that signed and fielded Jackie Robinson, first African American baseball player who became Rookie of the Year, among many other accolades in his career. Because there's obviously problems. As a history teacher, this is the most civil unrest I've seen in my lifetime, followed probably by the riots after the acquittal of the police officers who beat Rodney King, and now this. This is probably the most civil unrest this country's seen since 1968. And the situation is eerily similar in many ways, partially because there's many problems we haven't resolved. And this was just really the spark that ignited a powder keg that was bound to blow at some point. And I suppose it's worth saying that oftentimes, days on end, nothing really egregious occurs, and there aren't really any problems socially on a day to day basis. But they add up, and it was a really tough week, especially for black Americans, about a week ago. You had before a man was killed in the street by police officers in Minneapolis. You had a situation where a man was murdered, and the cops had video of it, and yet no charges were filed and no arrest was made for a shockingly long time. And then when video made its rounds, everybody could tell, oh, wow, that man was just straight up murdered. And no one was held accountable. And then you had a situation where a candidate president was pretty smug about black folks who support him in their votes. He was pretty entitled to their votes, and made a comment about whether, if you're not supporting him, then he had some questions about your ethnic identity, which seems shockingly unfair. And then in the same moment, you seemed to have a black man just hanging out in Central Park, just enjoying the birds, and tried to correct a white woman about her dog being on a leash, and she blatantly threatened him that she would call the police and lie. She didn't say that she would lie, but she explain what she would do, and it was clear that it was a lie. And then she did so. Then she called the police to tell the police that a black man, oh, she insisted ironically on using the most politically correct term, African American man, while weaponizing race against him and trying to have police correct what she perceived as some sort of injustice. The crime apparently was being corrected by a black man in Central Park. And then you had an incident in Minneapolis that left a man dead on the street on some nonsense. And we obviously all saw the video with him pleading and them ignoring his pleas. And then when those officers were not charged with anything initially, it was too much. It was too much. It's too much to deal with. And so I've had a lot of conversations lately with people. Unfortunately, rioting and looting has given some people an opportunity to shift focus from the injustice that was done in the street at the hands of police and have shifted it to the behavior of mobs of people. But it doesn't change what happened on that street that day. It just gives people an excuse to forget about it and focus on other things. And so, as a history teacher, let me help you understand, for those of you who have trouble understanding, why something like that could erupt into such violence. Now, some people push back, oh, well, there was a black cop that shot an innocent white person, and then this person got shot, and this person got shot. And if we look at statistics and all that, look, I get all that. I mean, we can sit there and get into the minutia of the details of things or whatever. But as a history teacher, let me help explain, using some other examples, how tension like this perpetuates for a very long time. In many places of the world, there's a lot of tension between different groups of people. The Greeks still hate the Turks that invaded them centuries ago. The Palestinians and the Jews, the Israelites, still aren't getting along. That's been millennia at this point. It's happening for a very long time. There's the Japanese and the Chinese have centuries of tension between them, racial tension between them. Many Chinese or Japanese parents will disown their children for marrying the counter ethnic group. It goes on and on all across Africa. If you've watched what happened in Rwanda, we had an entire genocide there of Hutus and Tutsis, and the outside world looked on and said, what the heck is the difference between Hutus and Tutsis? I don't even understand what's going on. But they do, and it hasn't stopped. I was a Serbian linguist, besides being a Russian linguist, and worked at the Kosovo and Bosnia mission, and that didn't make a lot of sense to very many people as well. But the Catholic Croatians, the Orthodox Serbians, and the Muslim Bosnians did not get along in the least, and committed what we coined the term ethnic cleansing, which is really just a fancy word for genocide in their small corner of the world. So back to the United States then. Why is there so much racial tension? People say, well, we're all equal, right? There are all sorts of laws stating so. And that part is true. There are a lot of laws that suggest that you and I and everybody else in this country who's a citizen of this nation are equal under the law. It's literally some of the first lessons I teach my world history students. Civics class, government class should be teaching the same thing. I'll teach that at the moment. But we should all be equal before the law, which goes all the way back to the Roman Republic. You find writings about this in the Greek experiment with democracy. It's very important. And yet we're not really all equal before the law, are we? All you have to do is watch the Jeffrey Epstein docu-series, in which a man was committing horrendous acts on dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of children. And the investigation took a very long time to culminate in any sort of accountability for Jeffrey Epstein. The current president and a former president are closely tied to that man and his crimes. And I personally have no doubt that both President Bill Clinton and President Donald J. Trump engaged in illegal acts with minors when they were in the company of Jeffrey Epstein. I have no doubts. So that's not equal before the law, then, is it? Because you or I or any average person, if caught doing any sort of petty crime, would be held accountable. And yet the rich and powerful continue to sort of get away with some things. And so we're not quite equal before the law. Then add to that the fact that this country, as part of the British Empire, engaged in chattel slavery, which is where you own people as property. West Africans were captured by other West Africans, sold to Europeans, trafficked across the Atlantic to the Caribbean islands, South America, Central America, and indeed North America. Mostly in our southern states, not because the southern states were inherently bad, but that's because where most of the agriculture took place, and slavery is an economic phenomenon. It's about free labor. That's what it's about. It's about making money as cheap as possible. And if you don't have to pay the people who work for you and you can force them to work horrendous hours, you can make more money. And it perpetuated after our revolution, in spite of the fact that we wrote all of the right things. And I love the writings of our founders. I find them very inspiring. I find them to be very true then and now. And so when you write that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, when you write out our Bill of Rights and describe what things the government cannot do to us, that the citizens have a right to do things like speak and, more importantly, today, assemble, which is being suppressed. And had been suppressed as a result of coronavirus even before there were riots in the street. Those things still have meaning except when they're not being enforced. So, in spite of the fact that our country was founded on Enlightenment ideas, which I teach in my world history class, that freedom was not afforded to everyone. There was an entire group of people who were not even considered people in a way, because they were allowed to be owned, bought, sold, bred, just like livestock. That pain and that crime against humanity doesn't heal easily. It could have healed by now, but it did not. Civil War, freedom was afforded, but that freedom came with a lot of obstacles. And then when through resentment of their loss, the southern states saw to begin creating laws that were shockingly biased against their black neighbors, created the so-called Jim Crow laws. Discrimination perpetuated, and things didn't heal, and it was difficult for things to heal. And finally, 100 years later, from the South's defeat and the Emancipation Proclamation, another fight was fought for real legal equality for blacks and whites to finally be treated equally. And that fight seemed to have been won, although there were plenty of martyrs along the way and plenty of people killed in the streets by National Guard, by police. American citizens murdered in the streets by the state that's supposed to protect and serve them. And yet, equality was still not quite achieved, was it? So it went from an overt racism where people were proud to be racist and nationalistic towards their own race, and it went a bit covert. And we can see it in the justice system, we can see it in the education system, we can see it in the healthcare system, we can see it clearly in government. And this covert racism shows up everywhere, even among what I assume to be a white, upper class liberal woman in New York Central Park who, when faced with a confrontation between her and a black man, immediately used race as leverage to get what she wants. So nothing that educated woman ever said before that confrontation mattered, because when it came down to it, she was easily as racist as any Klansman, as any white nationalist can be, because she did not see him as an equal, and she used his race against him to get what she wanted. So this is nothing new. We could talk about peasant uprisings throughout the Middle Ages, throughout history. Ancient times, doesn't matter. The ruling class tends to oppress the working class, and eventually that working class gets fed up and rises up against the working class, or against the ruling class, and the ruling class puts down that rebellion. That's what happens. And that's what's happening now. You know, and I don't have an answer on how to stop the rioting, looting, destruction, and burning of our cities. I don't know how to stop it. Leadership would have helped, especially from elected officials. I've seen leadership from non-elected officials. I've seen many people discuss what happened with real clarity and explain why the situation is what it is with real eloquence. But I haven't seen it from elected officials in any way that satisfies me. And now we have states sending military against its citizens, and the president himself talking about sending regular soldiers, Marines, I'm not sure, I imagine Army, against its people. So a fighting force trained and designed to fight against terrorists in caves of Afghanistan or streets of Baghdad or Syria are now going to be deployed against its own people, American citizens in the streets of our cities, will be deployed against them. And that has tons of consequences as well. We saw National Guard shoot people at Kent State in the race riots 1968. Many people were shot and killed in American streets. So it's a very dangerous time, and I don't have answers. I still am on the outside looking in with much empathy and hopefully a bit of understanding. And sometimes all we can do is lend our support. And if called upon by a community to assist, to be ready to assist in whatever way that is. My own little soapbox, I'll take a minute there, I suppose. I don't feel as though the political system serves its people very well at all. And I mean that across the board. There are two main dominant parties, and I don't feel as though they serve communities across this nation well at all. I think the best example of that is in the COVID crisis. Americans were tossed somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000, depending on your financial status and wealth. And meanwhile, $5 trillion was created to bail out corporations, CEOs, the largest and wealthiest institutions in our country. And $5 trillion is a tremendous amount of money. If I were in my classroom, I would gladly demonstrate how many zeros that is on the board so you could visualize what $1 trillion looks like. It's a lot of money. We had $21 trillion of debt, $22 trillion of debt before that. And we just magically created $5 trillion to prop up corporations. Meanwhile, 40 million Americans are now out of work, and our communities are on fire. If I were to offer a suggestion, I suggest making new political parties. I'm a big advocate of third parties, and neither of the main two parties want to hear that. And you'll hear plenty of Democrats especially bemoan that and say, oh my gosh, if you don't vote Democrat, you're going to reelect Trump, and how horrible will that be? And it might be awful, but I don't see the alternative as really anything better, especially given his performance recently and historically. And I would remind people that the current Republican Party was actually founded as a single issue party to end slavery. The Republican Party was founded more than anything else as an abolitionist party to end slavery in the South. And it achieved that. And it maintains its status today as one of the main two parties. And so perhaps it's time that African Americans form a party to represent them and their needs above all other needs. Because I don't feel as though either of the two parties that exist are doing that right now. And perhaps it's time for that. Perhaps it's time that people begin forming parties that represent their specific needs and interests. And some people say, well, you'll never win. That's not true at all. You can absolutely win in your community, especially if there's a majority of you. You can all get behind a person and elect a person to represent your needs in Washington, D.C. That's how democracy works. Democracy is not vote shaming people and telling them that they are wrong to vote the way they voted. I didn't vote for either of the two main parties in 2016, and I've taken some heat for that. I've been told, oh my gosh, how could you do such a thing? You wasted your vote. How terrible of you. But I don't care. I vote my conscience and I vote my values. And neither of those two parties represent me at all or the values that I hold. And so I refuse to vote for them. And if enough of us refuse to support political parties that exist and the political powers that exist, they lose power. So that's my recommendation. That's the only bit of advice I have at the moment as your history teacher, as your economics teacher, American Justice class, your teacher, my 8th grade history kids. That's all the advice I have, is that remember that the only tiny little bit of power that we are given in this country is our vote. And you do not owe it to anyone. You do not owe it to anyone. They should earn our votes and deserve them. And if they don't get them. So I don't know if that message will mean anything to anybody, but as those of you who were in my class all year long and in previous years know, I am often liable to give little speeches like this. And COVID has me out of my classroom and you guys out of my classroom, but there's the message anyway. I wish we could have a dialogue back and forth. I really wish I could hear what your thoughts, feelings are. If you watch this and you want to have that dialogue, comment, I will gladly respond. I miss you all. I wish I were able to be in our classroom and to lead and have this discussion together and help us understand collectively, but I cannot. I've been forbidden to do so by the state, by the government. And so I hope you all are well. I hope you all are safe. And if you need anything, please reach out to me either in this or you know how to email me or whatever. All right. Take care, everybody. I'll have an update about school soon.